They carried an empty urn past me like I was furniture. 3 hours later, my daughter-in-law told me I had 3 days to get out. Rain slid off the chapel awning in tired grey sheets, mixing with the smell of lilies and bleach. The choir had barely finished when someone handed me a folded invoice. Rush Memorial Chapel, $2,800, April 12th. Paid by me. I hadn't booked a thing. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. It helps more than you know. Cleveland, Ohio. Early spring. The day my world went quiet. Maya, 30, smooth, always rehearsed, stood at my kitchen table, her heels ticking against the laminate. The oven timer, unset for anything, began to ding. She slid a manila envelope across the table. "For the best," she said, inside, a typed notice to vacate in 3 days. Surviving spouse. Probate transfer. Legal words dressed like sympathy cards. Above her, the framed deed gleamed on the wall. My name paid off since 2019. That frame had outlasted 2 winters and a burst pipe. Now she stood beneath it like a new owner choosing paint. "This house is my retirement," I said, my voice dull as a wrench. "Every receipt in it is my pension." She laid my son's phone on the counter, screen cracked, Face ID wiped clean. "I'll handle everything," she said. "It's what he wanted." She brushed a lily petal from her sleeve and flicked it into my sink. Each click of her heels on the porch sounded like another day torn from my life. When the door shut, the house sagged. I opened my cigar tin. Spare keys lined up on masking tape. My life catalogued in brass teeth. Garage, back door, lockbox. My fingers found a florist receipt. I didn't remember. 28 white lilies. 900. April 10, 9:42 a.m., ordered by Maya. I underlined the date. The ink bleeding like the edge of a bruise. The rain stopped, but the silence stayed. A red light blinked on my landline, the old phone my wife loved for its ring. I pressed play, wind, a cough, then a voice. "Dad, hoarse, familiar. It's me." The caller ID, 814-555-2470. Erie. My son used to fish there every summer. I replayed it until the battery died. If my son called on April 10th, how did they cremate him on April 11? Grief is heavy. A lie is heavier. I laid the eviction notice beside the florist and chapel bills, 3 crooked stones in a shallow river, and listened to the house breathe. The maple outside shook off the last of the rain. I picked up the phone, dialed the Erie number. Straight to voicemail. "This is Dad," I said. "If you're there." "Call me!" The line clicked, and the quiet afterward felt colder than the storm. 3 days to get out. She'd said it like a deadline. But I had 3 days to learn whether I'd buried my son or a story. Grief is supposed to end with silence. Mine began with questions. The morning after the funeral, April 13th, the sky over Cleveland was the same dull silver as the chapel urn. I woke to the echo of her heels leaving my porch. I dreamed of my son knocking on the door, but in the dream I couldn't stand up fast enough to answer. The kitchen still smelled like lilies and lemon polish. I stared at the eviction notice, spread open beside my coffee mug, while the oven timer blinked at me, 003. Stuck on the same 3 seconds since yesterday, I told myself maybe Maya was just overwhelmed. Grief makes people do strange things, but grief doesn't misspell a man's name on his cremation papers. The envelope from Rush Memorial Chapel had arrived with the urn. Cremation certificate, Alan J. Weston, April 11th. Except my son's middle name is Alan with 2 L's. My wife chose that spelling in 1989 because she said 2 L's looked stronger than 1. We'd never got it wrong, not once. I took the certificate to the dining table, grabbed my reading glasses, and circled the mistake in red pen. It looked like a warning sign. At noon, the doorbell rang. It was Mrs. Pruitt, my next-door neighbor. Retired county clerk, professional casserole carrier, and the closest thing I had left to family. She held a dish wrapped in foil. "You eat something, Joe," she said. "You look like a man waiting for the ground to open." I told her about the eviction notice. She frowned, deep lines framing her mouth. "They can't probate without a death certificate," she said. County offices were closed all weekend. I asked, so there shouldn't even be a file yet. Not unless someone jumped the line, she said. Let me check something. She pulled out her phone, fingers quick from years of typing public records. After a minute, she looked up. There's no death certificate on file, Joe, none. Maybe a delay, but... She let the sentence hang. That night, I tried calling the Erie number again. Straight to voicemail. The recording was generic, no name, no clue, but the faint hiss in the background still sounded like water. I left another message. Son, if this is you, I need to know. Just send a sign, anything. I sat at the kitchen table until the clock hit 2:07 a.m., watching condensation slide down the window. Every sound in the house felt amplified. The hum of the fridge, the slow drip in the sink, the creak of the floorboard by the hallway. It didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like evidence. The next morning I decided to test the lie. I called the funeral home pretending to be an insurance representative. Just confirming the client's identification before processing payment, I said. The man on the phone hesitated, shuffled papers, then replied, We didn't handle the identification directly. Family provided a signature release. Whose signature? I asked. Monsieur Weston, he said. Maya. That was when the nausea hit. Not the kind from grief, the kind from realizing someone's moved your name on a document that's still warm from the printer. I opened the cigar tin again. Each key gleamed under the kitchen light. I lined them up beside the papers, the chapel bill, the florist charge, the eviction notice. My whole life suddenly looked like a case file. At 8:03 p.m., a gust of wind slammed the back door. I nearly dropped my coffee. For a second I thought it was him, my son, coming home like he used to, stomping snow off his boots. But when I opened it, the porch was empty. Just the mailbox flagged down, and a flyer from Lakewood First Credit Union advertising fast-track beneficiary updates. I stared at those words like they were a whisper from the other side of the story. Beneficiary updates. That's when it clicked. Maya wasn't grieving, she was moving. Moving money, moving ownership, moving me. I spent the next hour tracing every financial document I could find. Old bank letters, insurance slips, the last mortgage payment showing a $0 balance, the photocopy of the deed I'd kept after the fire inspection. Each sheet felt like a weapon I'd forgotten I owned. I found my son's old email password on a sticky note in the junk drawer, the one he used when he first started at the auto shop. It didn't work anymore, but I didn't need to break into anything. I just needed to prove the timeline. I called Mrs. Pruitt again. If someone files a fake probate claim, how fast can that get flagged? Depends on the clerk, she said. But if you've got documents, bring them downtown. Don't let that girl scare you out before Monday. Her voice steadied me. I brewed fresh coffee, pulled the blinds tight and took a deep breath. The fear wasn't gone, but something colder had taken its place. Focus. I opened a clean notebook, wrote the date April 13th, Monday, and titled the first page, Timeline. Under it I wrote April 10th, florist purchase, $1 to $1,900, ordered by Maya. April 11th. Cremation certificate, misspelled name, April 12th. Funeral and eviction notice, April 13th. No death certificate on file. I underlined the last line twice. The oven timer blinked again. Stuck at 0:03, I pulled the plug from the wall and whispered, Not yet. Outside, the maple rustled in the wind, like someone shaking the truth loose from its branches. I poured another cup of coffee and stared at the blinking red light on the landline. One new voicemail, time-stamped 7:11 p.m. April 10th. I pressed play, hoping for my son's voice again. Instead, I heard a faint shuffle, a whisper I couldn't place. Maybe static, maybe breath. Then a click. I didn't sleep that night. I just kept staring at the papers spread across the table, the 3 bills forming a triangle around the word timeline. Tomorrow, I'd start checking the records myself, because grief was no longer my problem. Forgery was. If paper buried my son, then paper was going to bring him back. I woke up before sunrise on April 14th, coffee in hand, and drove downtown to the Cuyahoga County Administration Building. The streets were slick with overnight rain, and the city smelled of wet asphalt and diesel. I told myself I was just checking a record, but deep down I knew I was looking for a resurrection. Inside the building, the fluorescent lights buzzed over linoleum floors. A young clerk with half-moon glasses typed my son's name into her system. "Sorry," she said, "no death certificate on file for that date." "None at all?" I asked. She shook her head. "Sometimes families delay filing. Could be backed up." I slid a folded public records request across the counter. "Check probate filings too," I said. "Name Alan J. Weston, 2 L's. She nodded, typed, frowned. "There's a new entry," she said, lowering her voice. "Filed yesterday. Affidavit of heirship names a Maya Weston as sole beneficiary." My pulse thudded. "Who notarized it?" She turned the screen toward me. "Notary stamps from a firm called Green Title Services. They closed 2 years ago." I stood there staring at the screen until the numbers blurred. I thanked her, printed a copy, and stepped outside into the rain. The courthouse clock read 9:37 a.m. I called Mrs. Pruitt. "You were right," I said. "She filed already." Her voice sharpened. "That's fraud, Joe. You can fight that." By 10:10 a.m., I was at Lakewood First Credit Union. The bank smelled like carpet glue and coffee. Mr. Yates, the branch manager, had known me since my factory days. "Joe Weston," he said, shaking my hand. "Sorry about your boy. What brings you in?" I told him quietly that I needed to know if any life insurance beneficiary changes had been made recently on my son's policy. He tapped a few keys, frowned, then leaned in. "I can't disclose details yet, but I can tell you this. A change request came through online the evening of April 11th. It's under review." I blinked. "After the funeral?" He nodded. "Exactly. He promised to flag the account and send a concern notice to the insurer. I'll mark it as potentially improper authorization," he said. "If you get an attorney, have them contact me." When I stepped out, the sun had finally cut through the clouds. It didn't feel like warmth. It felt like exposure. Back home, I opened my old doorbell camera app on my tablet. I hadn't checked it since before the funeral. The footage from April 14th, 11:37 a.m. loaded after a pause. Maya, standing on my porch with a man I didn't recognize. Her cousin, I'd learned later. She was holding a key. She tried it in the deadbolt. It scraped, failed. Then he whispered, "We'll get it tomorrow." I exported the clip, labeled it "Unauthorized Rekey Attempt," and emailed it to myself. My house wasn't just a home anymore. It was a crime scene waiting for a case number. At 3:22 p.m., the clerk from earlier emailed me a scanned copy of the affidavit of heirship. I printed it and laid it beside my receipts. The notary stamp was crooked, the seal faded. At the bottom, a date, April 15th, filed before the county even registered a death. That evening I walked across the street to Mrs. Pruitt's porch. She squinted at the paper through her bifocals. "That's not the county seal. And look here, the stamp number starts with 27, but ours start with 43. You sure?" I asked. "I worked there 30 years, honey." "That's fake as a $3 bill. I called Legal Aid Cleveland that night. Explained everything." The woman on the phone, Ms. Harper, spoke like she'd heard it all before. "Come in tomorrow at 9, she said. "Bring every document you have. No originals, just copies. We'll start an emergency injunction to stop the transfer." When I hung up, I looked at the mess spread across the table, bills, receipts, photocopies, that phony affidavit. I grabbed a red accordion folder from the closet, the kind I used for union grievances back in the 90s. On the tab, I wrote one word in block letters, "evidence." Into the first pocket went the $2,800 chapel invoice, the $1,900 florist receipt, the doorbell screenshot, the scanned affidavit, and a photocopy of my deed. I ran a strip of tape across the front and wrote, "If found, deliver to Harper Law." That night, I sat at the kitchen table staring at my son's cracked phone. I pressed the side button. The screen lit briefly, showing the last missed call, April 10th, 7:11 p.m., the same time as that eerie voicemail. Coincidence doesn't keep the same hour twice. At 11:46 p.m., my phone buzzed. "Unknown number." I answered, heart racing. No one spoke, just faint wind and static, then a whisper. "He's okay." A pause. Ranch won't let phones. Wait a week, then silence. I took a photo of the screen before the number disappeared. Area code 814 again. Eerie. The oven timer blinked one last time before midnight. I unplugged it and whispered, "That's enough waiting." Tomorrow, I'd walk into legal aid with a red folder and a ghost on voicemail. I didn't have proof of life yet, but I had proof of lies. I've always believed that revenge should be quieter than rage. It should sound like paper sliding across a desk, not shouting in a street. By sunrise on April 15th, I was standing outside Legal Aid Cleveland, red accordion folder under my arm. The air still smelled of wet pavement and burnt coffee from the cafe next door. I walked in at 9:02 a.m. Sharp Ms. Harper, the attorney, was younger than I expected. Mid-30s, sharp suit, steady eyes. She listened while I laid out the receipts and the fake affidavit. She didn't flinch when I mentioned the voicemail from the eerie number. "No death certificate," she said, flipping through my papers. "Then legally your son isn't dead. And if he's not dead, there's no probate, no transfer, and no eviction." She tapped her pen. "We'll start with a temporary restraining order that stops them from changing title or removing you from the property. But we'll need something that hints your son might actually be alive." "That voicemail helps." I handed her my phone. She played the message twice, brows knitting tighter each time. "Keep this device untouched," she said. "Chain of custody matters. I'll submit an audio transcript and carrier verification request." When she printed the TRO forms, I noticed the court date stamped at the bottom, April 20th, 10 Cheeks a.m., 5 days. 5 days to gather every nail that would seal Maya's coffin of lies. From there, I went straight to Lakewood First Credit Union. Mr. Yates met me in his office, door closed, blinds half drawn. "Joe, you weren't wrong," he said quietly. "The system logged a beneficiary change request on April 11th at 6:48 p.m. It flagged for review when the IP address didn't match your son's usual login. It came from another device. Can you tell who?" "Not yet," he said. "But I can file a concern notice and temporarily freeze the life insurance policy, $150,000, until the verification clears. That buys you time." He signed the notice and slid me a copy. I folded it carefully and slipped it into my folder, right beside the fake affidavit. It felt like my first piece of real armor. Back home, the air in the house felt heavy. I locked the front door and sat at the table, opening my key ledger. That old cigar tin with masking tape labels. Garage, back door, lockbox. Maya's car fob was missing. I'd seen it on the counter after the funeral, but it was gone now. I decided to lock down everything I could still control. At 4:10 p.m., I reset the garage keypad, photographing the old code card and writing the new one underneath in blue tape, time-stamped on my phone camera. I sealed the original card inside the red folder. As I was taping the new code to the wall, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "He's okay," it read. Then another line. "Don't tell her you know. No name, no photo, just a clean text that vanished seconds later." I screenshotted it and saved it in a new folder labeled April 15th Evidence. That night, I went through every file again. I wrote everything in my small pocket ledger. April 10th, florist order. 1-900, April 11th. Cremation certificate. Misspelled name, April 12th. Eviction notice, April 13th. No death certificate, April 14th. Affidavit filed. Fake notary, April 15th. Bank freeze notice. TRO filed each entry, steadied me, like bolts tightening an old machine. At 8:17 p.m., I heard my neighbor's TV through the wall. Some legal drama. A gavel hit the soundbar just as I laid my head on the table. For the first time since the funeral, I didn't feel grief pressing down on my chest. I felt purpose. Before bed, I checked the oven timer. Still unplugged. I left it that way. That silence was my reminder. No countdown, but my own. The next morning, I drove to the post office and mailed a certified copy of the TRO paperwork to Maya's attorney cousin. I wanted the signature, the acknowledgement. I wanted her to see that I wasn't the broken widower she imagined. On the drive home, the radio played a weather update. Rain returning Friday. Good, I thought. Let the storm wash away her plans. By evening, my inbox pinged. A message from Ms. Harper. Court confirmed TRO hearing for April 20th. Evidence folder strong. Bring devices, 5 days. That's what stood between me and the truth. 5 days to prove that the son she buried was still breathing somewhere in Erie. I poured myself a coffee and looked around the kitchen, the deed still framed above the stove. This house is still mine, I said out loud to no one, and I'm not leaving until justice does. Outside, lightning flickered over Lake Erie. The maple tree rattled like it approved. For the first time in a week, I slept through the night because my revenge wasn't a plan anymore. It was a process. The house began turning against her before I ever raised my voice. Every appliance, every creak, every forgotten ding seemed to testify. On April 16th, a courier showed up at my door carrying a thick envelope. Petition for possession, it read across the top in bold black type. The signature at the bottom belonged to Maya's cousin, the same one who tried my lock 2 days ago. Attached was a retainer receipt for $3,500. I set it on the counter, unopened. The oven timer, still unplugged, sat silent beside it. The first quiet witness to a war she didn't know she'd already lost. Mrs. Pruitt stopped by that morning with a yellow legal pad and the sharp eyes of someone who's been in a courthouse more times than church. Write what you know, not what you fear, she said, sliding the pad toward me. Dates, times, names. We made a witness list. Mr. Yates from the bank, Ms. Harper from legal aid, the clerk who spotted the fake stamp, and Pruitt herself. I wrote their numbers, time-stamped everything. By noon, I called the phone carrier. They faxed me a VoIP call log showing one crucial line. April 10th, 7:11 p.m. Incoming. Erie, PA, 8:14. The same minute as the first voicemail. I printed it, folded it once, and slipped it into the red folder behind the bank freeze letter. At 2:40 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was Ms. Harper. Our injunction holds, she said, but they've filed a response claiming you're unfit to manage the property due to grief. I laughed. That's creative. Keep laughing, she said. The judge won't. Bring your evidence Saturday morning. We'll prep early for the hearing. I hung up and stared at the eviction notice still taped to my fridge. I'd left it there on purpose. It reminded me of what people become when they think you've stopped paying attention. That night, April 17th, I heard footsteps on the porch. My heart stopped, expecting her again, but it was Tony Delgado, my old union rep. He'd heard from Pruitt what was happening. Tony was a note-keeper, always carried a pocket notebook. You remember the week of the funeral, he said. Maya told me your boy's ashes were already scattered, April 11th, 3 p.m., but I was still at the chapel at 4. The urn was on the table. I blinked. You sure? He flipped his notebook open, tapped the page. I wrote it down. April 11th, time, temperature, everything. I write things so people can't change the story later. I shook his hand. Then you're my favorite kind of witness. On April 18th, I got an email alert from Mr. Yates. An attempted $12,000 transfer from my son's checking account to an account labeled M. Weston Household, blocked and logged. Attached was a scanned copy of the alert letter for Miss Harper, another receipt, another nail. That afternoon, the florist called. A soft-spoken woman named Clara. Sir, she said, about the lilies from the 10th, there's a refund request from your daughter-in-law. She says we charged her wrong. Keep it open, I said. Could you email me that form? Of course, she said, hesitant. She wrote that she only ordered 20 stems, not 28. I thanked her and stared at the phone, because that small difference, 8 lilies, was the first detail Maya got sloppy with. People always forget the little lies. The rain started again that night, tapping against the windows. I made coffee, black and strong, and sat watching the maple tree sway under the porch light. When I looked at my notes, I realized I'd collected enough truth to rebuild a life. Still, one question haunted me. If he was alive, why hadn't he called again? At 8:12 p.m., the oven timer flashed briefly. 3 blinks, then dark again. I hadn't plugged it in, I smiled. All right, kid, I whispered. I'm still moving. Before bed, I drafted a timeline for Ms. Harper's court submission, April 10th, florist order. In 900 April 11th, misspelled cremation certificate, April 12th, funeral and eviction, April 13th, no death certificate on file, April 14, fake affidavit, filed April 15, bank freeze, TRO filed April 16 to 18, witness statements, transfer attempt, florist dispute, every entry proofed, every dollar recorded, every hour accounted for. At 9:44 p.m., I emailed Ms. Harper a scanned copy of everything. She wrote back one line, solid. Next we show the judge how grief looks when it pays its bills. I smiled for the first time in days, because now grief wasn't my weakness. It was my evidence. Before sleeping, I added one line to my notebook. April 20th, court. Bring everything. The storm outside rumbled like applause. The dead called back on a Tuesday night. April 19th, 8:02 p.m. I was at the kitchen table, sorting evidence in neat piles, receipts, letters, screenshots, when my phone lit up with the same number I'd memorized by heart. 814 555 2470, the eerie number. I froze, then hit speaker and record on my backup phone. Dad? The voice was weak, like it had been dragged through gravel and wind. But it was him. My son, I gripped the edge of the table. Where are you? A cough, then background noise. Birds, the scrape of shoes on concrete. A woman's voice faintly in the distance. 2 minutes only. Don't come here, he said quickly. They keep phones in a lockbox. I'm at Lake Arrow Wellness Ranch outside Erie. I signed in April 9th. I'd never said yes to any funeral, Dad. My throat locked. They said you were... The line crackled. Then I didn't know what she did. I'm okay. Don't trust her. And just like that, the call dropped. For a full minute, I couldn't move. The hum of the refrigerator became the loudest sound in the world. I stared at the recorder screen, heart hammering, until I saw the timer still running. 1 minute. 37 seconds of proof that my son was alive. I sent the file straight to Ms. Harper. Subject line, voicemail 2, proof of life. Within minutes, she replied, save both devices. Bring originals to court. I'll file for carrier authentication first thing. That's when the fear turned into fire. I went to the window, half expecting headlights, some desperate attempt from Maya to reclaim control. Instead, the yard was empty, except for rain slicking across the driveway. But the doorbell camera had its own story to tell. At 10:26 p.m., my phone pinged with a motion alert. I opened the feed and there she was, Maya, standing on my porch again. This time she wasn't alone. The same cousin held a tape measure against the window frame. You sure about drapes? He asked, half laughing. New ones by May, she said. The house will be mine before summer. Then she smiled. The kind of smile that used to look polite. Now it looked practiced. I saved the clip, emailed it to Harper. No words, just the file name, April 19, measuring my future, MP4. When I finally lay down, I kept the red folder beside me like a shield. Every piece of paper, every note, every clip, they weren't just proof. They were my map out of hell. By dawn, I'd already drafted a statement for the hearing. I'm the legal owner of 14442 Lakeview Road. No death certificate exists for my son. No verified probate or transfer has been filed. I possess recorded proof of contact from the individual presumed deceased on April 19th. It was clinical. Maybe too calm, but calm wins in court. Later that morning, April 20th, 7:45 a.m., Ms. Harper called. You're bringing both phones, yes? Both, I said. And every paper that lies can't stand up to his voice. Good, she said. Judges remember voices. I looked around my kitchen. The deed framed above the stove, the unplugged oven timer, the bills laid out like small gravestones. I thought about Maya's certainty, her perfect performance at the funeral, her crocodile tears in front of the urn. And I realized something. She didn't just want the house. She wanted my silence to sell it, but I'd traded silence for evidence. I took one last look at my son's cracked phone, the screen reflecting the maple tree outside. Hang on, I whispered. We're almost home. When I stepped outside, the air smelled of rain and metal. April 20th. The day everything would flip, and I wasn't walking into court as a grieving father anymore. I was walking in as the man who could prove the dead don't always stay buried. There's a sound the world makes when truth steps into a room. It's not loud, just the soft hush of every lie realizing its time is up. April 20th, 9:30. Ms. Harper met me at the entrance, her briefcase slung over one shoulder. "Ready?" she asked. "As I'll ever be." "Good," she said. "Let's make them wish they'd filed nothing at all." The courtroom was smaller than I imagined. Beige walls, a long oak bench, and a single clock that ticked too loudly. Maya sat at the petitioner's table in black again, the same dress she wore at the funeral, as if mourning could be recycled. Beside her was her cousin, the attorney, slick hair, nervous smile. She didn't look at me until the judge entered. Then she glanced over her shoulder, confident, poised, like she was about to win something she already considered hers. The bailiff called the case, in the matter of the estate of Alan J. Weston. I sat up straight. My son's name had never sounded so stolen. Her lawyer went first. He spoke in smooth, rehearsed sentences about a widowed daughter-in-law managing unexpected loss, probate rights, household stability. He mentioned the respondent's fragile state of mind, nodding toward me like I was furniture again. Then it was Ms. Harper's turn. She rose without a paper in her hand, just my phone. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "we are here to challenge the very premise of this case. Because there is no estate to divide, no death to certify, and no legal basis for possession." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Explain," she gestured toward me. "Mr. Weston's son is alive," the courtroom murmured. Maya's attorney scoffed. "This is ridiculous. Let's proceed with evidence," the judge said. Adjusting his glasses, Harper walked the judge through each exhibit, her voice steady. Exhibit A, county record showing no death certificate on file. Exhibit B, cremation certificate with the wrong middle name and an invalid notary seal. Exhibit C, bank letter freezing a $150,000 life insurance policy for suspected unauthorized beneficiary change. Exhibit D, video footage from April 14th, showing Maya attempting to rekey the respondent's home. Exhibit E, audio recordings of 2 voicemails received from the number registered to the presumed deceased. Verified by carrier timestamp. Play Exhibit E, the judge said. She pressed play, the sound of wind, then his voice. "Dad, it's me, don't come here. I'm at Lake Arrow Wellness Ranch near Erie. I never said yes to a funeral." Every head in the room turned. Even the court reporter's fingers hovered above the keys. I watched Maya's expression change, a flicker of disbelief, then fury, then something worse. Recognition. The judge leaned forward. "Ms. Weston, did you know your husband was alive at the time you filed this petition?" Her lawyer stammered. "Your Honor, that recording could be anyone." "The carrier verification form," Harper said, handing over a stamped document, "confirms the call originated from Mr. Weston's registered mobile device at Lake Arrow Wellness Ranch. Signed in under his legal name." The judge read it. The room went dead quiet. "Miss Weston," he said softly, "you might want to consider your next answer very carefully." Maya's eyes darted between her cousin and me. Her lips trembled. He left. I thought he wasn't coming back. He told me he wanted peace. "Then why the fake affidavit?" Harper asked. "Why the bank change?" "The forged seal? I was trying to protect what was ours." "What was yours?" Harper said, stepping forward. "Because that deed on the wall in his kitchen? That's his, not yours. You filed false probate paperwork while your husband was still alive to seize his father's home and his life insurance. That's not protection, Ms. Weston, that's fraud." The judge raised a hand. "Enough," he turned to Maya's attorney. "Counselor, your client's filings are under oath. I'm issuing a 14-day injunction on all estate transfers and possession claims. Additionally, I am ordering a status confirmation of Mr. Alan Weston through the facility named in the recording." He signed the order, the pen scratching louder than any gavel. Maya slumped back in her chair. Her cousin whispered something about miscommunication and overzealous paperwork, but the judge wasn't listening. Harper leaned toward me. We did it, at least for now. In the hallway, Maya followed me out. Her voice was low, almost shaking. You just ruined everything. I turned to her, calm as winter. You did that the minute you buried a man who wasn't dead. She took a step closer. He'll never forgive you for this. I smiled. He doesn't need to forgive me. He just needs to come home. She stared, eyes full of something ugly, fear dressed up as anger, then turned and walked away. Heels striking like the last seconds of a countdown she no longer controlled. At the vending machine, I bought a can of ginger ale, the metal cold in my hand. I cracked it open, the fizz rising like a quiet toast to patience. The clerk from earlier, the one who found the fake notary, happened to walk by. She nodded at me. You get your answer? I held up the can. Got the truth, and that's close enough. When I got home, the house felt lighter. The rain had stopped. I pinned the court's stamped order, dated April 20th, 10:47 a.m., above the stove, right beneath the framed deed. The two papers fluttered in the same breeze from the open window. Paper buried my son, but paper also dug him out. For the first time in weeks, the oven timer felt like it could stay unplugged. When truth hits paper, lies scatter fast. By the next morning, April 21st, the court's stamped injunction was already echoing through the city's bureaucracy. Ms. Harper called before sunrise. We got confirmation, she said, voice sharp with restrained triumph. Lake Arrow Wellness Ranch faxed over their intake record. Your son was admitted April 9th under voluntary supervision. They're preparing a video statement for the judge. For a moment I couldn't speak. I just stared at the ceiling and whispered, Thank you. You don't have to thank me, she said. Just be ready. The next hearing's May 4th. Keep your phone close. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen surrounded by paperwork, the chapel invoice, the florist receipt, the fake affidavit, the bank freeze. Each one now felt lighter. The house no longer hummed like grief. It hummed like preparation. April 22nd, an email arrived from Mr. Yates at the bank. Another unauthorized withdrawal attempt. 5:11:13 p.m. April 20th, blocked. Account remains frozen. I printed the message, folded it neatly, and slipped it into my red folder behind the court order. By April 23rd, the story outside my walls began to turn. Tony Delgado dropped by again, his ever-present notebook in hand. Remember how she told everyone the ashes were scattered on April 11? He said, flipping a page. I wrote it down. 3 o'clock, she told me, but I saw the urn at 4. Can you swear to that? I've sworn to worse, he said with a grin. That same afternoon, my doorbell camera captured something new, the cousin again, sneaking around my garage at 1:12 a.m., screwdriver glinting under the porch light. I forwarded the clip straight to Ms. Harper. Within 10 minutes, she texted back, Trespass strengthens our injunction. Keep cameras rolling. I did. The next day, April 24th, I received an official letter from the life insurance company. Investigation opened for suspected fraud. Account under audit. All beneficiary changes suspended pending full verification. At the bottom, a note. Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Weston. The words felt heavier than their type. Cooperation meant survival now. That weekend, the city thawed. Spring came in soft, warm gusts that smelled like rain and lilacs. I cooked breakfast for the first time since the funeral, eggs and black coffee. When the toast popped, it startled me. Not because of the noise, but because it was normal. The oven timer, still unplugged, watched from the corner of the counter like an old friend taking a well-earned rest. I took my meal to the porch. The maple tree shimmered in the sunlight. The house felt alive again, mine again. Inside, the phone rang. It was Ms. Harper. The court approved a video appearance from your son, she said. Scheduled for April 28th, 2 p.m. The judge wants him on record before the next hearing. Thank you, I said, voice cracking. One more thing, she added. Keep that red folder close. We're not finished. Fraud cases attract cleanup acts. I didn't ask what she meant. I already knew that night. I checked every lock twice, tested every window. and put the red folder in the old bread box under the sink, the same one where my wife used to hide birthday cards. At 10:17 p.m., a text from an unknown number lit up my screen. Tell the court he's lying. Then it vanished, deleted before I could screenshot it. I didn't flinch. I just smiled. Panic was her new language. By April 25th, I'd stopped looking over my shoulder. The house no longer felt like a trap. It felt like evidence breathing. When I went to the porch that evening, the sunset poured gold through the branches. I poured myself a ginger ale and toasted to something my wife once told me. The truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs to last. 4 more days until I'd see my son's face on that courtroom screen. 4 more days until silence turned into proof. And when that moment came, I promised myself I'd be ready. There are moments when life stops being about winning. It becomes about finally hearing the truth out loud. April 28th, 2:06 p.m., the day the world finally turned the right way up. Ms. Harper and I sat in her narrow conference room, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the walls lined with old case files and framed pro bono awards. The laptop sat open between us, waiting for the judge's secure link. I could see my reflection in the screen, lined, tired, but alive in a way I hadn't been since the funeral. The court clerk appeared first, then the judge in his chambers adjusting his glasses. Are both parties present? He asked. Respondent Joseph Weston with counsel, Ms. Harper replied. Petitioner's counsel? Maya's cousin appeared on screen, his suit collar uneven, his expression rehearsed. Maya sat beside him, pale, her hands clasped so tightly the knuckles showed white. Then the judge said the words that stopped my heart. We will now add the video witness from Lake Arrow Wellness Ranch. The screen flickered, pixelated, and then there he was, my son, alive, thinner, paler, eyes tired but smiling. State your full name for the record, the judge said. Alan James Weston, he answered. His voice was steadier than mine would have been. The judge leaned back. You are the individual presumed deceased by these filings? Yes, sir. I never gave anyone permission for a funeral, cremation, or affidavit. When were you admitted to Lake Arrow? April 9th. Voluntary program. Phone restriction for the first week. I could hear Maya's breath hitch through the computer speakers. Her cousin whispered something, but she didn't respond. Ms. Harper stepped forward. Mr. Weston, did you communicate with your father on April 10th? Yes. I left him a voicemail from the payphone. Told him I was safe. And you had no contact with your wife during that period? None. She thought I'd stayed with a friend. I told her I needed space. I didn't know she was planning any of this. The judge's pen scratched across the pad. So, to confirm, you were alive in a controlled facility while your spouse conducted funeral arrangements and filed probate claims? Yes, Your Honor. The courtroom's silence was almost holy. Ms. Harper handed the judge our final exhibit, the time-stamped phone logs, the audio, the certified intake form from Lake Arrow. Your Honor, the record shows fraudulent intent. We ask that all probate filings be vacated and referred for investigation. The judge nodded slowly. Granted. Then he turned toward Maya. Miss Weston, do you have any statement before I rule on sanctions? Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again. I thought he'd left for good, she whispered. I panicked. I didn't mean... The judge cut her off. Intentional or not, your actions have legal and moral consequences. You faked a death, misrepresented documents, and tried to seize assets. This court orders a cease and desist on all probate actions and refers your filings to the county prosecutor for review. Her cousin mumbled something about emotional distress and marital confusion, but it didn't matter. The sound faded under the gavel's sharp crack. The judge looked directly at me. Mr. Weston, this court recognizes your rightful ownership of the property at 1442 Lakeview Road. You are free to return to your home without interference. I nodded, unable to speak. Then he addressed the screen again. Mr. Alan Weston, we wish you continued recovery. My son smiled weakly. Thank you, Your Honor. And just like that, the call ended. The image froze on my son's face, eyes clear, mouth half curved into forgiveness. Ms. Harper closed her laptop gently. "It's over," she said. I leaned back in the chair and let out a breath that had been sitting in my lungs for 19 days. Outside, the rain had stopped. The street shimmered with leftover sunlight. In the parking lot, Maya hurried past me, sunglasses on, though there was no sun. For a second, I almost pitied her, almost. But pity is just mercy's shadow, and she'd stepped too far into darkness for either. That night, I went home, pinned the court transcript copy to the wall beside the deed. 2 pieces of paper, same purpose, proof that names mean something when you fight for them. Then I made 2 cups of coffee, one for me, one for the memory of every promise that nearly got buried. Grief had turned into justice, and justice, I learned, tastes like coffee gone cold, but earned. Justice doesn't come with trumpets. It comes with paperwork and silence. By May 1st, my house felt different, lighter, like it had exhaled after weeks of holding its breath. The maple out front had gone from bare branches to full green overnight. I took it as a sign that something inside me had thawed. 2. The official letter from the court arrived at 9:14 a.m., dismissal with prejudice on Maya's claim, and full ownership reaffirmed in my name. The envelope also contained a line that made me laugh, all costs, including respondents' legal fees, to be paid by petitioner. Total, $40,200. It wasn't about the money. It was about the principle. Finally being the one they had to answer to, Ms. Harper called later that morning. "They've withdrawn all probate filings," she said. "The insurance company's closing their investigation soon. You'll get an official notice within 10 days. I thanked her, but she cut me off gently. "Don't thank me. You did the hard part. You stayed calm when everyone else wanted you gone." I smiled. "I guess that's the factory in me. Slow and steady," she chuckled. Well, slow and steady just got the win. That afternoon, I went out to the porch with a box of Maya's mail, letters, glossy catalogues, things addressed to Mrs. M. Weston. I stacked them neatly, sealed them in a brown envelope, and wrote one word across the front: return. I didn't want her ghost in my mailbox anymore. By May 5th, I was standing at Edgewater Park again, the same spot where I'd once whispered my son's name to the lake. But this time, he stood beside me, alive and quiet, a little embarrassed by all the fuss. He looked better, stronger, clearer. "They let me go yesterday," he said. "Took a while to untangle everything." "I know," I said. "You've had enough time to heal." He laughed softly. "You and Harper did more healing than I did. We stood watching the gulls dive at the water. I could smell lilac somewhere behind us." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a keychain. "My old garage key, the one that went missing weeks ago." "She kept it," he said quietly. "I found it in her bag before I left." "Thought you'd want it back." I took it, the metal warm from his hand. "I already changed the code." "I figured," he smiled, a small, tired smile, but it was real. When I drove him home later, he stopped at the mailbox and stared at the house. "It looks smaller," he said. "That's what guilt does to a place," I told him. "Shrinks it." Inside, I brewed coffee. We didn't talk about her much. Some wounds don't deserve airtime. Before bed, I slid the court's dismissal letter and Maya's written apology, stiff, formal, court-ordered, into the red folder. I labeled the final tab closed. For the first time in a month, I slept without leaving the hall light on. She wanted a house. What she got was a record that will follow her longer than any mortgage. May 22nd, 9 a.m., the last court date. A formality, they called it, just to close the case. But I wanted to see it through, all the way. I arrived early. Same courthouse, same lemon polish smell, same clock ticking too loud on the wall. Maya sat 2 rows ahead of me, her posture smaller than before, her eyes fixed on nothing. Her cousin wasn't with her this time. She had a public defender now, the kind that holds folders tighter than they hold hope. When the judge entered, the bailiff called out our names one final time. Weston versus Weston. The judge's tone was dry but clear. "All filings have been withdrawn. The respondent's property remains solely in his name. Petitioner's actions have been referred to the county prosecutor for review. Maya nodded faintly, lips trembling, but said nothing. Then the clerk read her court-ordered apology. It wasn't much, just a few lines typed on letterhead, forced and bloodless. I, Maya Weston, apologize to Joseph Weston for any distress caused by my actions regarding property and probate. I accept full responsibility for filing documents in error and for any misunderstanding that resulted. The judge signed off, stamped the file, and said the word I'd been waiting a month to hear. Dismissed with prejudice. No music. No cinematic fade-out. Just a single sound, the thud of the gavel, and the slow scrape of chairs as everyone stood to leave. Maya turned once. Maybe to speak, maybe to plead, but I didn't give her the moment. Some people mistake your silence for forgiveness. I wasn't giving her that mistake. Outside, Cleveland finally looked like spring again. Blue sky, wet sidewalks, the smell of earth after rain. I walked toward my car, the court copy of her apology folded neatly in my pocket. On the way home, I stopped at a corner diner I hadn't visited since before all this started. The waitress, same one who used to serve me and my son on Sunday mornings, smiled. "Been a while, Joe," she said. "Been a long month," I replied. "What'll it be?" "Just coffee," I said, then added, "Make it strong. I've got some celebrating to do." Back home, I slid her apology letter into the final pocket of the red folder and wrote the word "closed" across the top. Then I tucked the folder behind the framed deed above the stove, where it belonged. Proof that justice doesn't vanish when the ink dries. The house was quiet again, but it wasn't the hollow quiet of grief anymore. It was the quiet of peace, earned the hard way. Later that evening, my son called. "They're letting me back to work next week," he said. "Feels good to be useful again." I smiled. "I know the feeling," he paused. "She tried to call me, Dad." I figured. What should I do? "Nothing," I said softly. Let the silence answer her. It's louder than any word you could say. After we hung up, I stood in the kitchen, poured myself a cup of coffee, and watched the sun fall across the floorboards. The house still hummed in its old rhythm, the clock ticking, the pipes settling, the faint creak of the maple outside tapping against the window. I looked up at the framed deed and spoke out loud. "Maybe to my wife, maybe to the house itself. You didn't lose me," I said quietly. "You gave me away, and I took myself back." Outside, the maple dropped a few seeds into the yard, spinning, weightless, free. I left the oven timer unplugged. I didn't need countdowns anymore. Some endings don't explode. They settle, like dust after a long storm, proof that you can rebuild a life once you stop apologizing for owning it. And that's how my story ends, not with revenge, but with reclamation. Because peace, when you've earned it, is the sweetest kind of justice there is.